Shelby, thank you so much for joining us today. For those who don't know, Shelby Eckard is leading GRC at LightEdge. She works closely with their CISO to manage everything third party risk, risk management, compliance, and audits. We're super happy that she's a compliance client and here to chat a little bit today. Thank you, Shelby.
Of course.
Would love to hear a little bit from you about your background, what brought you to LightEdge, and so on.
Absolutely. So background, I can start with got my master's of accounting degree at KU. Followed shortly right thereafter in an auditing job at a mid-sized public accounting firm in Kansas City. Did that for about 5.5 years and found my way to LightEdge shortly thereafter. The CISO that I work with here at LightEdge, he was also my boss at my old job. So hence the connection coming over to LightEdge, which was a nice, easy transition. But I've been compliance manager here at LightEdge for 4.5 years now. As you mentioned, doing all fun things GRC related. I've been with LightEdge during a very exciting time. When I started, it was much smaller than it is today. So it's been pretty cool to watch it grow through all the acquisitions and see what's even ahead from now. So it's been a fun time to be a part at LightEdge for sure.
It's always fun when the companies grow, the GRC footprint definitely grows as well. And oftentimes resources don't necessarily grow in proportion with it. That's something that a lot of our GRC clients deal with every single day. How have you managed? Have you seen that? Have you seen compliance needs change for the team as things have grown at LightEdge?
100%. And it trickles right into why we work with compliance and why we found you guys. We needed to scale for sure with compliance needs, compliance requirements, all of the things. We were living out of Excel sheets, which that's burdensome, and I could not wait to get out of there. But it's also not scalable. As LightEdge was growing, like you mentioned, our compliance tracking reporting mechanisms were not growing at the same speed. We needed something else that can grow with us as our compliance requirements expand. As LightEdge grows, we get more customers. They have different compliance requirements, more compliance requirements we add to our stack, and that adds more complexity to our compliance program internally. So we needed something that could grow with us because we were not growing as fast as we wanted to as LightEdge was.
And can you talk a little bit about everything that you oversee, Shelby, in terms of
Yep.
GRC, and maybe a little bit
Yeah.
about where you felt the scale burden the most across your
Yes.
purview?
Absolutely. So hold all sorts of things into the GRC buckets. One of the big ones being third-party vendor management. That was the big driving force for us to look at tools, look at ways we could make this manageable, because there was no way we could keep up with how our vendor management and third-party management was growing if we wanted to keep adhering to all of our compliance needs and requirements. So vendor management, that's huge. It's a huge bucket for us. Risk management, policy management, a lot of the things that we're tying in with what we're using with the compliance application today. And there's also a ton of other pieces, and let me know if I'm diving into different areas ahead of time. But we've expanded some unique areas within the platform that we also manage. So OFI and nonconformity tracking, which is something that's ISO related for us, but also we're expanding that outside of ISO. So we do a lot of that. User access reviews and business impact analysis. There's all kinds of things underneath there that we touch. I'm sure there's even there's another really big one that slipped my mind at the beginning, but all of our external audits. So all of our controls, all of our evidence management, that was a second big driver for us to start looking for other tools that can help us. And we've taken on an internal audit, perspective of that. So we're eager to look and see how we can start integrating that within our compliance platform, which will be exciting. there's probably, a ton a ton of other areas, but, um, I think that that covers the main topics, that our team works on a day-to-day basis.
Hmm. And so you mentioned that especially for third party and controls, those were the biggest drivers
Mhm.
needing more efficiency. Have
Absolutely.
you seen the needs for those just increase in line with the business growth and everything else that you guys are doing?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, third-party management in general, it increases, even just based on the risk associated with it. So there's so much out there going on. There's so many, security issues. There's so many things that you should be aware of that your vendors are doing. And you should be aware of that your vendors are also compliant in these things because, they are an extension of you in a sense. Um, so that is huge. So as we grow, there are more vendors that we're looking into to help us, perform various things throughout the organization. Um, and we just want to make sure that everything that we've considered, we've vetted, that we've looked at it before, and all of those things. Um, so just making sure that we're making the right choices for vendor management and that we're continuing to have eyes on them throughout the whole process that we're working with them.
Mm. Can you talk a little bit about what the process looked like initially? So one of the things that, we really like to find in potential clients with compliance is that they should actually have a process that's really mapped out before they start working with us because we've seen the most success that way. When folks come
Yeah.
to us and they're, feeling like, hey, we have this process really clearly laid out, but now we need a way to make it efficient. That's ideal. And so I know that that was the case with you and your team. You had such an intricately mapped process, for example, for third party management. Can you talk a little bit about what that process looked like before?
Yeah, it felt like it was a very complex process, but it felt like it was as complex and robust as we could make it with, the abilities that we had within Excel sheets. So we felt like, we had kind of hit that ceiling, but yeah, we took our compliance requirements, we were taking compliant requirements from other teams and making sure that we were integrating that all within our Excel vetting spreadsheet workflow, which was great because even just taking that step, we had taken a huge improvement from we had a Word document that had, a base of 10 questions, that you just scrapes the surface of what the name of the vendor even is. So it was really great to see the progression. And then those sheets, like you said, you got to see what we were working with right before we came into compliance. Um, but even then, it kind of ceilinged out, and we weren't able to capture everything throughout the organization. So it was very compliance team specific. We had input from other teams every now and again, but really the involvement was not throughout LightEdge as a whole.
Mm.
Which has been what's really exciting to see the evolution of compliance in our vendor management tool now is we've involved so many teams in the review and approval process of these vendors, and we're seeing a much more centralized result of vendor management, which is what we wanted for sure. We want all teams to be involved. We want to make sure we're touching on all requirements, compliance, finance, security, operations, all of those things together. And compliance is helping us see that. We have having at least the vendor management dashboard, we're able to easily show an up to date version of current status of vendors, current listing of vendors for, for example, some of our operations team members. They can go in there, see if the vendor's been vetted, know that they're an approved vendor, and they can continue on with the steps in their workflow, which has been huge. That was much more difficult in a spreadsheet that was just on the compliance SharePoint site, and it was huge. It was not an easy thing to send around. It was a big file.
Mm.
Um, so yes,
Mm.
we had the basics and bare bones of what we wanted, but it was really nice to just scale that and push that out and see what it could grow into with those platform capabilities.
Mm. I remember your process was so deep. You had basically internally assigned folks on your team to be reaching out across the business and have
Mhm.
multiple interfacing points with different folks across the business for each vendor.
Absolutely.
But I remember clearly just when, we were starting to chat after you guys had decided to sign on with compliance, you had showed me the spreadsheet and it was a number of steps and you were getting interfacing with the business, but it was all through the GRC team member, if I recall correctly.
Mhm.
Right. And so
Yeah.
now, is that still the case? Are you able to kind of have the platform be the central point of connection?
So it's been a little bit of both, right? So like you mentioned, we are keeping a lot of that internal and communicating those vendor needs with the certain LightEdge contact internally. We liked that for a couple of reasons. We had a little bit more control over the process. We could bug them a little bit more. We could send them a quick email, send them a message on Teams. And it also, we felt like it gave some ownership to the vendor relationship. They know what vendor they're using, the specifics of it. However, we have been recently, dabbling in the fact of we are now looping in those vendors within the compliance platform, which has been an exciting and a big step for us. So we still use both methods depending on the vendor and what services they're providing. But it is nice to have the capabilities for when those situations do exist, and we want to pull in the actual vendor contact into compliance and use that as the central piece between the vendor contact, us, and the LightEdge contact. It's been
Mm.
working great. So
I wasn't even
the
thinking external. I had known that you guys had
yeah,
so many kind of touch points internally that you wanted to
we
manage.
did. Yeah,
And so those ones are hopefully now managed via platform. And I didn't realize
they
that you had
are.
now started directly engaging external vendors with the platform. That's good to hear that.
We have that's been a recent development for us. But we had a couple pushes from some of the LightEdge folks, and we still have some involvement from that LightEdge contact from an ownership perspective that we wanted, but we've been able to divvy out some of those other vendor technical questions out to the vendor themselves. So, but yes, so even internally, we have been sending those directly to the folks and they've been sending them back. It's really great to manage, really great to see what's been sent, when it's been returned. And we're getting really good feedback from that as well. Once we got over the step of is this legitimate email? Is this phishing? But once we got through that, everyone's been very, very receptive of that. It's much easier to manage than email chains and sending sheets back and forth with versions and all of that. So it's really nice to have
Mm,
that pathway for that information.
mm. And of course, most of our clients usually send questionnaires out direct to vendors, but I know that you guys were hesitant. Can you remind me why that was again, Shelby?
Yes. Yeah. It was more so having a little bit more control of the situation. So if it's internally, we're able to send that directly to the LightEdge employee, which we work directly with on various things. So we're able to bug them if we're getting any sort of delays. Um, and from an ownership perspective as well. So the fact that they're answering these questions, they're finding these answers, they are learning more about the vendor they're bringing into the organization for one, but also
Correct.
realizing the information that they're responsible for and coordinating with this vendor.
Mm,
So ownership and control was a big push to why we wanted to keep as much of as much of the vendor assessment process within our bubble as we can.
mm. And so then what exactly prompted the change? Like folks just reaching out and saying, "Hey, we think you should
Yeah.
just be sending this to the vendor now?"
That's exactly what happened because we're very open to feedback and all of the things. And we had a person reach out and he's like, "Hey, like can we look into maybe sending some of these over? Like I'm going to be asking them for that information anyways." And so I'm like, "Okay, like if there's a need for it, let's explore." And so we've created, like, we have our standard process where we send it to the internal LightEdge folk, but then we have a secondary process if we get some feedback that they would prefer to have the vendor work through a majority of the technical questions. We've filtered that out. So now we have, like I said, the standard, and then we have a secondary that has a smaller questionnaire for the LightEdge contact to still answer and have that ownership perspective. But then
Mhm.
we have the vendor side to get maybe easier, or it's an easier way to get those technical answers. Eliminate the middleman of the LightEdge contact having to go through that. So
Yeah,
yeah,
makes
that's
sense.
that's recently, within a month or so. So fresh. a
Fresh change.
fresh change for us, but we're always open to new things, and it's worked out well. A couple of times we've tested it, they've been timely, and I know that's a big concern for us. Is in the past we had issues with vendors just not not returning them. It's a low priority for them. So, but we've had good luck so far. So
Mm.
it's been good.
So the process for LightEdge then is basically, it's vendor intake. So somebody will message
Hmm.
you and say, "Hey, I want to create a new vendor. I want to onboard a new vendor." Then you send them an internal questionnaire via the compliance
Hmm.
platform that gathers some basic information. Is that right?
Yep, absolutely. Some basic information, some high level documentation like any agreements, any proposed quotes. And we also gather, specific questions and requests from other teams. So maybe
Mhm.
some specific security things, just trying to get ahead of the game and get those answers up front
Mhm.
because we know we're going to need them eventually. So it would
Mhm.
consist of those things as well.
And then at what point do you maybe do a follow-up questionnaire or send a questionnaire to the vendor directly?
When we are using the internal only process, we don't involve the vendor at all.
For the more recent ones, you've basically done a subset of the initial questions
Mhm.
to the
Yep.
internal person and then more technical questions to the vendor.
Yep. Exactly.
So 2 separate questionnaires, basically. One and then the other one
Yep.
goes.
Yep.
Perfect.
Exactly.
Complete
Yeah.
sense. Have you had any vendors send you to their trust portal instead of answering your questionnaire?
No, we haven't. So we like I said, this is relatively new. We've only done the vendor involvement one twice. Um, However, for vendors sending us to the trust portal, we do come across that within stages of our vendor assessment process. So if we're using our standard approach where we send the internal light edge contact, the preliminary, we get that back, we perform an analysis, we do risk rating, all those things. Once we get that done, the compliance team ourselves performs an assessment of specific compliance requirements. That's when we may see those trust portals,
Mm.
um, which we usually try and keep notes of those of where those trust portals are so we know them ahead of time. However, if we don't already have that information, it's hopefully been provided by the internal contact in the preliminary. So that's a question that we ask at the beginning, like, how are we going to get your compliance documents? And so usually the light edge contact can attach them there, or maybe
Mm.
they're directed to a trust portal. So as I'm explaining this, we probably do get directed to the trust portal, but we just don't see it initially because that light edge contact is knowing that at the beginning or being told that information.
It is kind of interesting because I'm curious how that's gonna change over time. Some folks say that, vendors are sending them more and more to trust portals, but
Mhm.
the information that they actually need in the questionnaire is not in the trust portal. And so what ends up happening is an extra cycle where the vendor sends you to the trust portal and you kind of go to it and say, "Hey, okay, maybe that takes care of 10 of my questions out of 50. Can you fill in the other 40, please?" And so
Absolutely.
that's happening so much. And I was just curious if you've had to deal with that yet, but it sounds like folks are still answering your questionnaires, whether that's internal or externally.
So far, so good. I will say that maybe we're on the other side of that though, because Um, so our team, that's one of the other responsibilities that would fall under, the GRC buckets that we manage is external customer requests, whether that
Mhm.
is questionnaires or compliance documentation. With questionnaires, we do try and take, a first pass and check before we send them over, but we do generally funnel all of our folks to our trust portal that we
Mm.
have. Um, so maybe that's just a change of pace between company, but we do at least take an initial pass. But I can see it being very easy to um, just have them take the first stab at the trust portal and then go back and check. But I can totally see how that creates the secondary cycle if that's not done at the beginning.
And what happens when you're on that side of the coin? So, if you're getting a questionnaire, you send your client to the trust portal. Do you see them come
Mhm.
back often and say, "Hey, we've got some questions"? Not really?
We usually don't. I'm not going to say that doesn't happen because I'm sure it does, but like I mentioned, we usually try and take a first pass at the questionnaire beforehand. And
That's
so
fair.
that's probably filtering out and making sure that, oh, we're looking at these questions. We know that's on the trust portal. That's fine.
Yeah,
So I think that's probably why we don't receive a lot of
that is
questions
definitely
back,
why.
because
Yeah.
we've kind of screened it beforehand. Um, so I think that helps for us being on the other side of that coin. So,
Yeah, no, absolutely. It is interesting to see how third-party risk and trust are about to kind of meet
oh
somewhere.
yeah.
I think it's still really to be decided how they meet. Because we have clients of varying maturity levels, I would say, some of whom are happy to get a trust portal because that is a little bit of a checkbox for them, for
Mhm.
their vendors to send a trust portal because, they may not have the most advanced third-party risk process, and so for them, the trust portal kind of does enough. But then you have other clients who get we know right now, our clients who get frustrated with their vendors for sending them to a trust portal when our clients are, NIST 853 and looking to ask a boatload of questions that are just nowhere on that trust portal. And then it just takes an extra
Absolutely.
cycle of back and forth to get the information, which is an interesting kind of friction point between trust and TPRM, I think.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I believe that we've even had the same frustrations when we've been answering questions. But I will say too, at least from LightEdge's perspective, we have a ton of information on our trust portal. We have several certs, several assessments.
Mhm.
And whenever we see a new
Mm.
questionnaire come through, if it's a standard questionnaire like a SIG or a CAKE, which we already have those out there, but say a new one comes up, we take that opportunity to populate that out there.
Yeah.
And so I think that's also helping filling in gaps for that as well. But um, absolutely, I mean, when you're answering those questions, I think one helpful thing for us is having some of that, I don't know, the compliance reporting experience a little bit. So if
Mhm.
we're looking, say we have our questions on our compliance team analysis and we're looking for specific things, we might have we might have an idea of where to look initially. Like, oh, within a SOC 2 report, it might be under this criteria. And so that at least helps us find some things here and there whenever we are looking in that trust portal. But it's not an end all be all. And there definitely are some questions that are not covered in those compliance reports that you end up having to reach out about anyway. So, yeah, we've definitely experienced both sides for sure.
Curious to see how that evolves, I think. It will be very interesting,
Hmm.
especially for folks like LightEdge who take third-party management so seriously. As you start to get directed to more and more trust portals, we'll just see kinda how you
Yeah,
guys take it. Because I don't think as many
absolutely.
companies are managing their trust portals as, you know, intentionally and detail-oriented way as you guys are, just as a heads up.
Yeah. Well, it at least helps us, it pays off. Like we put a lot of time and thought into it, and I do think it pays off in the end to have that.
So good to hear that. I want to talk a little bit about what else you see as a potential for automation and tech support as you are kind of continuing to automate and following the digital transformation journey on the GRC side. Can you talk a little bit about what's next for you guys?
Hmm. There's probably a few things that we have lined up. I'm really excited about the compliance application, honestly. Since working with you guys at the beginning, I mean, we started with our 4 basic modules, and we've had business needs come through for contractor management, for OFIs and nonconformities, and BIA, all these things. And it's been great to work with you guys and create solutions within compliance that weren't necessarily, baseline solutions. So it's been really fun to figure out, hey, we have this manual process. How do we make it better? And I'm like, compliance we can do that. There's so many ways. And if not, chatting with you guys, we figure out, is this gonna work? And I don't think we've had something that hasn't. So that's what's been exciting is we've come up with some sort of solution to automate it, right? Um, and so we've done that for a few things already, and I have a few things lined up that we're ready to start start brainstorming through. Like I mentioned, we picked up the internal audit work. I would love to get that in there. We
Mm,
already pull the evidence, we already have the controls, like really excited to integrate that. And
mm.
we have a few other projects I know I've sent over to Rachel that I'm sure she's ready to chip away at some point. But there, to answer your question, there's a lot. There's a lot in the future that we could automate within our team, and I'm really excited. I can see the possibilities of it happening.
Mhm.
Essentially, whenever our team is going through our daily task, if we find ourselves having to open up 3 different spreadsheets or go to 3 different places, or whichever the case may be, it sends the light bulb and it said, okay, how can we centralize this? How can we get this into one platform and get so many more capabilities out of it with recording, notifications, anything like that. Even a visual from internal folks.
Mhm.
The fact that we can assign things to people, whether that's task approval within compliance, and they can see what they're doing and they can see all of the meaning behind it, is huge. It helps just bring compliance, the platform, but also um, compliance requirements just full circle throughout LightEdge. It creates a great visual, a great starting point, great central point for our team for sure.
Mm. Sounds like control is really one of the things that you are seeking, kind of that control that comes with visibility. Just being
Oh
able to
yeah,
put your arms around it, I think
just
sometimes that's the
yeah,
hardest part. Just, can I see
absolutely,
everything I need to see? That whole cliche
absolutely.
single pane of glass is a cliche for a reason, I guess, because sometimes you get to a point where you realize that that's what you need. You need to just see everything. That just makes
Yes,
you feel so
yes,
much more in grasp or in control of it all because you have grasp on it.
absolutely. And there's nothing worse than something coming up and you had no idea about it. You don't even know what it is. You don't know the ins and outs. And
Where it
now
goes
that's a
on the
can of
mental
worms.
map.
Yeah, exactly. Which happens. There are things
Yes.
that will fall through the cracks. That's just, that's life. But compliance at least helps make that less of a thing. That happens much less when you can have a visual on everything that's going on. And at least have a current stat of what the status is. So
I
yeah,
wonder if we can
absolutely.
use some custom fields, specifically for the internal audit piece. So some of our clients, for example, they'll do internal audits within their control programs. So you can also some
Mhm.
of them will create a new program for their internal audit, but some will actually do their internal audit within a program. So they'll have a internal audit score 2024, internal audit,
Yep.
notes 2024, and then they'll basically
Mhm.
keep those in there, give it score, let's say 1 out of 5, and then they will hide those fields when their next year's internal audit comes
Comes
up.
up.
But then when they export it, they have all of the information. So then they can do the analysis of year to year. They can look at it in the platform too. But, if they want to run deeper, analytics on it, they can actually look at the difference. Okay, it was
Between
a
the
3
2.
out of 5 last year. It's a 4 out of 5 this year. That's good. Or, 80% of things improved, 15% stayed the same, 5% decreased. Something like that. Maybe we should have a think about that for you guys.
Absolutely. That sounds great too, and we might be digressing just slightly, but, we're thinking from an internal audit standpoint, creating areas that are even outside of our,
Mm,
um, compliance standards and assessments. Like, maybe we just wanna do some best practice areas,
mm.
um, and so
A custom
creating a
framework.
program for that best practice area. Yeah. We're getting into the weeds for sure, but it trickles into, we have a lot of ideas for us in compliance, and it's exciting because I know that once we get those under the belt, we it's so much easier. We're going to have such a better time testing these things, making sure we're doing, getting better and improving. And
Mm.
when you spend much less time on updating spreadsheets and doing all the folder work, you have more time to just make things better, um, which is what we want for sure.
That's what we want as well. As you know, that's been the number one goal of mine. I keep saying it, but I know that the world's data is safer when GRC teams are focused on what really matters and are not
Hmm.
spending their time chasing control owners, chasing vendors for responses, I don't know,
Exactly,
manually adding evidence files to an audit report or references and links to an audit Excel sheet. Oh, goodness, it's just not the
exactly,
best use of time for the people, and it's not
exactly,
what GRC practitioners wanna wake up every day and do. They wanna figure out solve the whys behind compliance, whatever that may
exactly.
be, which is a perfect
Yeah.
ending to our conversation, Shelby, to ask you, as you think about compliance and GRC, what is the why behind compliance for you?
The why for us was, and we may have touched on it in the beginning slightly, but LightEdge is growing, but also so are risk, and so is security, and so is compliance requirements. Like everything is growing and we want to grow with it. And the best way to grow with it is, like you mentioned, having a tool that can help us manage that time and grow with compliance,
Mm.
and grow LightEdge as it does.
So good to talk to you, Shelby. Thank you so much for the time today. It was such a pleasure.
You're welcome.